Well,
Got
welcome
it.
everybody. It's fabulous to see you all here this evening. I'm just going to begin with a welcome. We respectfully acknowledge the wisdom of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their custodianship of the lands and waterways. The countries on which Spinifex offices are situated are Juru, which is where I am in Far North Queensland, Bunurong and Wurundjeri, Wadawurrung, Gundungurra and Noongar. We also acknowledge the many women throughout history who have fought for the freedom and for women's freedom and the freedom of lesbians, often at the cost of their lives. So it's really a huge pleasure to be having this launch of Sandy's book. I know you did it last week as well, but it's really great to see you all. So I wanted to talk for a moment just about Sandy. I have to pause now and again to let people in. Sandy and I have known one another for a very long time. In fact, we were at Home University together and we were both studying women's history, and we got to know one another through various means. I also happened to be present at one of the very earliest of her psychotic episodes. So it is really fantastic to be able to be here and in a very different world and in a very different place, particularly for Sandy and for me too, for that matter. I have also visited Sandy in various hospitals over the years, but what's happened over the last decade has been truly extraordinary, because I've watched how Sandy has made really huge steps towards recovery. And so that's my bit, but I also want to just read a bit more from Sandy's bio in the front of the book. Sandy, amazingly, has an OAM. I didn't think I'd know anybody with an OAM, but there are a couple on this particular meeting. Sandy went to school in Ballarat, and she's lived with schizophrenia for about 40 years, maybe a bit more. She's published heaps of articles, 8 volumes of poetry and other books concerned with the disparate topics of madness, domestic violence, the trials and tribulations of playing midweek ladies' tennis, and the mad world in which we live, including the times of the pandemic. They were particularly mad, I think. And some of these have inspired other artists to compose music, libretti, and dance. Sandy's also become an advocate and a community educator, and she speaks to school kids, university students, community groups, and to doctors about what it's like to live with a mental illness. And she shares her home in Christmas Hills with friends, and both human and animal. And you never know, one of the animals may appear during the evening. The other introduction that gives me a great deal of pleasure is to Jackie Yowell. I met Jackie towards the end of 1986 and worked with her for about 6 months at Penguin Books. I was a baby editor, and in that 6 months I learned a huge amount from Jackie. I was very sad when she left Penguin at that time, but we remained friends. We kept in contact. We remained friends. And so I'm thrilled to have you here today, Jackie. But Jackie is the person who encouraged and guided Sandy through the process of writing this book. But Jackie's career in book publishing goes back much further, about 40 years. She started with Longmans in Nairobi, Kenya, where she was born and raised, and then in Australia, where she was editor and publisher in both international and independent Australian presses, such as Penguin Books and Allen and Unwin. In retirement, she still works editorially with writers whose voices need to be heard. The other thing is that Jackie worked with Sandy and with Margaret Leggett, who will also speak tonight, on the book Out of the Madhouse, From Asylums to a Caring Community, ? And that was a jointly authored book by the two of them. So after Jackie has spoken, Sandy will come back and introduce Margaret and Julie Dempsey, who says she's a co-consumer, and that they will also speak briefly after Sandy, I think. Anyway, so over to you, Jackie, and I hope you've unmuted. That's it.
Yes. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us and the introductions. I'm Jackie L, speaking from Melbourne, Victoria, Wurundjeri country, and I acknowledge the Wurundjeri traditional owners and offer respect to their elders, ancestors, especially women in the new generations, for their continuing custodianship of these lands. I was a publisher and editor who has had the privilege of working closely with some extraordinary writers of significant books during a wonderful career of over 40 years in book publishing. I've worked with some pretty amazing editors too, like Sue Hawthorne at Penguin Books in the 80s, as she developed the Penguin Australian Women's Library, reclaiming many rediscovered classics of women's writing. Thank you, Sue. I continue to marvel at the potential of books to shape the world that we create. Sandy Jeffs is an extraordinary writer and this is a significant book. Flying with Paper Wings, Reflections of Living with Madness, first published in 2009 by Ian Sison of Vulgar Press. What year was it that Sandy first appeared on my doorstep? Sent by a mutual friend, another author. Sandy had a huge armful of files, official records from her times in psychiatric hospitals. A person who would and could extract these was especially interesting to me. Such a person must have purpose and determination. One observation record ended with the judgment, insight nil. What a long way from that Sandy has come. I was already especially interested since I'd worked with Anne Devison on her classic book about her son Jonathan's schizophrenia, Tell Me I'm Here. Don't know if you recall this book. It was published in 1991. That was the same year Sandy was locked up in A Ward in Larundel under an involuntary order. Otherwise, Sandy says herself, she wouldn't be here. Working with Anne led me to understand the need to hear directly from those who struggle with schizophrenia, to give voice to that subjective experience. As Sandy worked determinedly to develop the book, a friendship began. She would mutter that she was a poet, not a writer, especially with a capital W, then would amble off to write another chapter, or condense one that we discussed. An email from her from January 2005 reads, I've cut 16,000 words from the first section. The second section is the mad bit, and I've cut stuff from that too, but it's still too long. I'm thinking people are going to be more interested in the madness than the rest of my life. I don't know. Well, it's turned out that people were interested in all the rest. Between drafts, we sometimes talked over a sandwich on my deck. Sandy's dietary preference then was a coon cheese sandwich and a Coke. Sandy wondered if writing a memoir showed delusions of grandeur, but she certainly has no pretensions. I learned of her Christmas Hills haven that she felt so lucky to be in, with her chosen family of pets, and Robbie and Dido, her Demeters, as she calls them, who always held her if she began to sink to the underworld, as in Greek legend. I heard of her cherished team Sandy, friends and associates who have stood with her through thick and thin. I'm sure some of them will be here today, including Miss Vines, her teacher from a Ballarat high school, who was there in person at her live relaunch this week. During Sandy's writing of this book, I was concerned about probing about sensitive personal questions, asking about gaps in the story. Inevitably, that required Sandy to dredge up grim memories and relive intense experiences, but she pushed on, taming her wild poetic talents to shape a prose narrative. Remember all that work, Sandy. Not only her own story of intense emotions and confusions, but stories of mad comrades. Sandy has reclaimed the word mad. I hope we're allowed to use it too, Sandy. I like it. And also of the responses to them, of family, community, medical, professionals, institutions. I did worry that the process could unhinge her again, but Sandy said the writing was almost therapeutic. I did wonder about her therapist, who apparently had not asked some of the questions her story was throwing up. Sometimes Sandy was more anxious, restless, twitchy than other times, and complained about the drugs she was prescribed. Yet I never doubted her mental capacity. Intelligence, empathy, honesty, and great humor continually shone through the writing process. Soon after this, she changed her therapist of many years, and if I recall with it, her drug regime. Then she did succumb to a psychotic episode. How related was this to the changes in treatment, and how much to resurrecting distressing memories? I suspect all, because her accounts of her madness so often echo words and images from those traumatic memories, deep in the viscera of her early years. She was admitted to the Albert Road Clinic in Melbourne. When I visited, she was curled up in a fetal position, complaining about Tony Blair wiring her brain. We did agree that the Iraq War itself was quite insane. I understood more fully then what it must take for Sandy constantly to keep her madness at bay. The experience of psychosis, madness generally, if I can use Sandy's term, is so intensely conveyed in both her poetry and this life story. Flying with Paper Wings. The traumatic memories, depression, fear, accusatory voices, despair at lack of agency and purpose, and wish to be at peace under a gum tree. The book also offers rare insights and understanding about professions and institutions of mental health and the societal norms and values that design and maintain them. But perhaps as valuable as her account is the ways in which she coped while gradually building confidence in her capacities, her mind, her creativity. She speaks of the great lift of spirit when Spinifex first published her poetry, Poems from the Madhouse, in 1993, which has reprinted several times and has since inspired 7 more volumes of poetry. Sandy says, "Madness is my monster, but it has also been my muse." In the new afterword to this republication of Paper Wings, Sandy is literally rhapsodic about her home in Christmas Hills. A secure home is so basic to sanity, yet elusive for so many struggling with insanity. Chrissy Hills, in the countryside an hour out of Melbourne, offered Sandy the solid base from which to explore her talents and joys, to become fully the person she is now. Poet, author, musician, champion hockey goalie, friend to many, mental health advocate and community educator, and much more. Recognized by awards, an honor roll, and an OAM. In her story, I see that having purpose became the spur to the resilience required for living with madness. And having a home and a Team Sandy made possible her hopes for recovery and living a full life. A decade or so after we'd worked on this book, Sandy rocked up with 80 taped interviews ready to do a new book. The purpose was to record the role of the madhouse on the edge of town, the Rundle Psychiatric Asylum, and to give voice to others who'd experienced this legendary place. Her friend and colleague, Margie Leggett, who's with us tonight, she was also occasional foe to Sandy, but in a very, very constructive way, was co-opted as co-author, and I worked with them to assist in the writing of this significant history, which also explores many ethical issues and issues of mental health. It was to win the 2020 Victorian Community History Award. The inclusion of those with lived experience, inmates like Sandy and Julie, in such books, in royal commissions, in reviews, reports, and plans for the future, can be seen as a significant move forward in this space where there are few easy solutions. Sandy says, mad people mostly need a reason to get out of bed. That is, that purpose and agency, hope and possibility are as vital to recovery as any drugs and therapy. I would be very interested to hear the comments of Julie and others on this. Working on these books has been an amazing learning experience for me, not only about this individual case of madness, but how relationships are nurtured and developed and what it takes to write a memoir like this. Sandy is one of the sanest people I know. Behind that black humor, she's also so damn reasonable. She's non-binary in the best of senses, discussing the curliest questions about the human psyche and all the adversarial positioning in the mental health field without proffering all or nothing answers on causes, nature, nurture, medical social model, drugs or the talking cure, asylum or community, expertise or lived experience. Sandy's writing explores them in the most interesting and personal way, with very important insights for us all, as individuals, families, engaged professionals, and as a humane society. I was so delighted to learn that Spinifex is now republishing this book, because Flying with Paper Wings has also become a classic in continual demand since it was published. Its new afterword tells of Sandy's journey since first publication in 2009, her thoughts since then, her steps towards recovery and progress in the mental health space, or lack of progress there. It continues to point to ways we could all do better, more effectively, and more compassionately. I'm delighted to see the republic of this significant book by this extraordinary writer with a capital W, Sandy Jeffs, and to launch what Sandy has described as its second coming. Congratulations, Sandy and Spinifex.
Thank you very much, Jackie. big claps. I know you can't really hear the clapping, but I'm sure other people are. Now I'm going to pass over to Sandy. Sandy, are you going to speak now and read a few things? Yep.
Do you want me to speak now or do Margie and Julie?
Well, I don't
Would you
mind.
rather I did? Would you rather?
I
I'll go now.
yeah, and then introduce Margie and Julie after you finish.
Okay. Okay, I'll go now. Okay. First of all, thanks, Jackie, for that lovely launch. I don't see myself as a capital W writer. Never have, never will, probably. I just feel like a fake all the time. But what can I say? But thank you to Sue and Renata and all at Spinifex for publishing Paper Wings, for doing it. When I emailed Sue, just saying, would you consider republishing? She got straight back and said, yeah, sure. And I was stunned. So I really thank you, Sue, for and for changing my life back in 1993. I can't thank you enough for that. It changed my life, and I found hope and purpose after being published. So I really hold you dear in my heart for that. I do acknowledge the First Nations people on whose land we stand, and I pay my respects to their storytellers and their oral tradition that we can learn from. So I just want to read a bit of a speech, and then I'll read from my book. On rereading my book, it's like I'm reading someone else's story, giving myself a crash course in who I am. I'm reminded of so many things I had forgotten, which had shaped me. If I sat down now to write the book, it may well be a different story, which raises the question about the veracity and reliability of memory. Why write a memoir? Well, as Jackie said, it was she who encouraged me back in the day to write this memoir, because I thought I was too young. In my 50s, who would want to read my story? And I'm too young to write a memoir, for heaven's sakes. It was ridiculous. But now, 20 years on, maybe there's some legitimacy in doing it. I do ask, is it an ego trip of massive proportions, an act of hubris, thinking people would be falling over to read my story? And I do ask, what's more egocentric, writing a memoir or having a psychotic episode? In both instances, I am the center of the universe. So navigating that tension between being a self-absorbed writer or having being less self-focused in the real world sometimes becomes muddied. Dido, my dear Dido, often asks me, don't you get sick of talking about yourself? And the short answer is no, I have to say, but I do it for a reason. So it's a fascinating process to actually interrogate yourself in public and at the same time make it interesting for a reader or a listener. As we build our own narrative, we also live in a community with others who inform our narrative and who also bear witness to it. We find out who we are through mirrors into which we peer, and it's often others who give us our reflection. So in some way, as my story resonates, maybe this is a connection that we can all make. So writing a memoir, or writing is a wonderful way of cutting through all the crap we accumulate, but you can also hide behind words and the myriad secrets words can shield. The question is memoir fiction? Is it the fabrication of one's life? Is it memory trying to recast lost fragments and figments of a past life? Who knows? But I do know that sharing my story is a privilege. If my words can help others understand the mysteries of madness and the legacy of childhood trauma, to understand the struggle to find purpose and meaning and how crucial they are for holding hope, though I don't hold hope, I fumble hope, then maybe it's a worthwhile endeavour. It's been useful to look back on the last 15 years and to see that they have been pretty damn good. They began with the double catastrophe of the Black Saturday bushfires and a meeting with madness. It was a grim, grim time. But as the years progressed, things have changed and evolved. Thankfully, there have been no admissions to a psych ward. I retired from midweek ladies tennis, but I've kept playing hockey, still enjoying the camaraderie of team sport, which is intoxicating. And music has become a much bigger focus of my life in the last 10 years, playing in the local Christmas Hills Orchestra and in the Footscray Gypsy Orchestra. And in the last few years since COVID and after COVID, playing duets with my friends and trios with my friends, Pip and Linda, who play violin and cello. So reflecting on these years has been salutary to see the good that has come of them. I acknowledge my two Demeters, Robbie and Dido, without whom I would not be here, and with whom I've shared 50 wonderful years, have given me a beautiful place to call home, and that gives me incredible security. And of course, our furry friends, Mingy, Clancy, Colin and Tyrone, who give such joy and without whom. So I really thank everybody and my team. Thank you, my team, for being there. I really appreciate it. Without my team, I wouldn't be sitting here. But there's so much to be thankful for in our lives, and we're all here and we're all doing this, and we've got to be thankful for the little sort of joys that we are given. So I'm going to read now from my book. I'm going to start with the beginning of the afterword and then read from the back of the afterword. The original book ended with Black Saturday and the admission to the psych ward at the Albert Road Clinic. And I begin my homecoming chapter with part of my Rhapsody poem that I've written about Christmas Hills called Christmas Hills Rhapsody. And it begins with the aftermath of Black Saturday. And then I'll go into some prose. Even as our hills were parched bone dry by the 10-year millennium drought, on that fateful February day, after a long, blistering heat wave had rolled across the landscape, with driving, angry northerly winds lashing our faces, we watched in horror as our paradiso became the inferno. What a terrifying day it was, its trauma carved into our collective memories. As the whirl of the consuming flames razed homes and scorched the earth, with blackened, twisted twigs and leaf ash everywhere, and wildlife displaced, it was as if the foretold apocalypse had come. Oh, how our hearts sank into a deep, deep trough. And in the aftermath grievance, as neighbour was pitted against neighbour, and some now uneasy in our fire-prone hills, having fled to the safety of the suburbs, we wondered if our hills would ever sing again. When I look back on the day of the fires and how traumatic it was, I don't know how I survived, given my mental state at the time. The recent disintegration of my mind into psychosis had weighed heavily. I had been so fragmented, I didn't know if I could be put back together again. I needed all the support I could muster for my mind to settle back into a pattern of thinking that was unencumbered by delusional, wayward thoughts and intrusive voices. As ever, after a psychotic episode, I had to rebuild my self-esteem and confidence, to get back to doing daily things, to feel normal again. Would I find my equilibrium after the double catastrophe of falling into madness and the ordeal of the fire that threatened our home? Would I and our hills ever sing again? Thankfully, over time, the wounds began to heal and our community mended. My Christmas Hills anchorage, where I'm grounded and sane, where we have spent 46 happy years, recovered. While the flames seared our skin, charred our land and disrupted nature's order, like that immortal bird rising, we emerged from the Black Saturday ashes, and the undying bush choir once again filled our hearts with grateful gladness. My mind also gradually eased back into a calmness where I felt integrated and whole. After witnessing how easily we could have lost our home, my connection to the bush and our home in the hills deepened. The psychotic episode was behind me, and with the support of my friends and my team, I rejoined the world and set about to again enjoy the things that had already been nourishing my life. And then in the back of the book, towards the end, I reflect on my family and just a general reflection. When I reread this book, this memoir, I was struck at how sad it is. So much has happened to me over a long period of time. I've been thinking a lot lately about my parents and realised I never really understood or appreciated how miserable they must have been in their awful relationship. How my mother's drinking was perhaps a result of her being trapped in a situation over which she had no control and couldn't easily leave. She had no education or financial independence. Her drinking may have been a form of self-medication to ease her unhappiness. Maybe she was depressed and never received the care she needed. My mother and father were so tragic, two people caught in a web of hate and self-destruction. I wonder, did they ever ask themselves what their bad behaviour was doing to their children? What I witnessed never goes away. So how do I feel about them now? After years of unresolved conflicting emotions, I see them through sorrowful eyes, from a safe distance. Even though I am still affected by their legacy and I can dissolve into a deep melancholy when horrific memories flood my senses, I am less distressed and able to see that that was then, and I am in the now, a better now. If only my troubled younger self, who carried the weighty baggage of childhood trauma, who was condemned all those years ago to irretrievable madness, had had a crystal ball in which to see the future, to know that it would be all right. So thank you very much. So now, after that little thing, I'm going to introduce Margie Leggett, who's going to say a few words as to why paper wings are still relevant today, even after these 15 years. So Margie, my dear friend Margie, Margie was the first director of the Schizophrenia Fellowship of Victoria back in the day, about 1978, I think it began. And she founded SANE, a national mental health charity. She was a past president of the World Fellowship of Schizophrenia and Allied Disorders, and she's been an absolute gun advocate for so many years in the mental health space, and a dear friend of mine for many, many years too. And when I asked her to write out of the Madhouse with me, she was very gracious in accepting the invitation. I phoned a friend and she answered the phone. So I want to introduce Margie Leggett, carer, advocate, gun advocate, wonderful person, and I love her dearly. Margie.
Thank you very much, Sandy. And I can't tell you how delighted I am to be here tonight, because I really think this book is so incredibly important. But I want to go back many, many years ago when I was training to be an occupational therapist. And in our training, we had to learn about mental illnesses. And I'm recalling that in learning about mental illnesses, we were given nothing but just a list of symptoms. You diagnosed schizophrenia if the person displayed positive symptoms and negative symptoms. And positive symptoms were hallucinations, paranoid ideas. An example there is that many people with schizophrenia feel that people are out to hurt them in some way. And of course, terrible emotional distress, unmanageable levels of anxiety. So those were some of the positive symptoms, and the negative symptoms were social withdrawal, staying in bed all day, apathy, an inability to be able to function in the way they had prior to the psychotic episode, and that they were no longer able to relate to people in the way they had before they had their illness. So then for positive symptoms, there were medications. And as we've already heard from Sandy and in the book as well, often with terrible side effects. And I've heard so many people with schizophrenia say that often felt to be worse, that the medications were often worse than some of the actual symptoms. So you would go to the psychiatrist, you would describe your symptoms, receive so-called appropriate medication, then out the door had dismissed or controlled the symptoms. That was all I think we were taught. Were we ever given any understanding about how these symptoms were experienced by the people we now call schizophrenic? How were their daily lives affected? What happened to their relationships with their family members and their friends? All we learned were just the symptoms and the medications that were to be given to them to treat them. So in reading Sandy's book, I was prompted to look at the question, or ask the question, is it any different today? I am no longer at the coalface, having been retired for many years, but I am still in contact with friends who have schizophrenia and some families who have a relative with schizophrenia. And I get the feeling that very little has changed. People go to their psychiatrist, get medicated, shoved out the door to nothing. Why do we have so many people with schizophrenia who are unable to live with their families? In many instances, this is because the families are not helped to understand a vast amount of my work, in fact, the Schizophrenia Fellowship was set up by family members who were devastated at what had happened to a son or daughter, but were not given, were not even spoken to, were not helped to understand, nor given any ways of learning how to manage a lot of those symptoms. And nowadays, I think it is absolutely awful that we have so many people with schizophrenia who have become homeless. Many land in jail for petty crimes like stealing food because they are hungry. In fact, the statistics for the jail in Melbourne is that 40% of the people who are in jail have a diagnosis of schizophrenia, which is a disgrace. The title of a recent article in the Australian New Zealand Journal of Psychiatry was 7 Decades of Antipsychotic Drugs. Why is the life of Australians with schizophrenia still so suboptimal? Now, all of that is really why I want to say why I think Sandy's book is so incredibly important, very, very relevant to our circumstances today. Firstly, it clearly describes the effects of the symptoms she experiences on her sense of herself. What is happening to her? How does she explain it? Why is she now behaving in a way that is so out of keeping with who she really is? Secondly, it shows the incredible importance of the need to really help family and friends, help them to learn to understand and then to know how to manage what initially is, for families and friends, an alarming experience of seeing someone so close start to behave in a very different and often can be quite a very frightening way. And thirdly, and I think the new and the final chapter in this edition of Flying with Paper Wings draws attention to all the amazing achievements of Sandy's life. We've heard a lot about that tonight, and I am continually amazed by my friend Sandy. We've heard about her poetry and her books, her amazing number of public talks, and particularly to school children. There is one really rather gorgeous story that Sandy told me. She was talking to a group of primary school children and talking about how her team, Sandy, really helped her. And one child put up his hand and said, "Please, Sandy, can I be part of Team Sandy?" Which I think is quite gorgeous. So we've heard about her talks, her appearances, her activities in her hometown, Christmas Hills. And these are only a few of her extraordinary achievements. So, is Sandy a schizophrenic? I hate that term and I hear it far too often, as though being a schizophrenic is the only thing you are. No, she is a fantastic human being like the rest of us. She copes with an illness called schizophrenia. And as you've heard, she's a very good mate of mine with an unbelievable sense of humour, which has me laughing uproariously very often. Thank you, Sandy.
Thanks, Margie. That was lovely. Nice to be acknowledged by you, and I acknowledge you too. So, we're moving on to the next speaker, who is my mad comrade, Julie Dempsey. Julie is a gun advocate for mad comrades. She works in the health department now as the senior lived experience advisor consumer in the lived experience branch at the Victorian Department of Health. Extraordinary. I don't know how Julie does it. I couldn't do it. My God. Julie's had lots of admissions to Larundel Psychiatric Hospital in involuntary admissions, to Willsmere, and she's been the chair of the Women's Mental Health Network of Victoria, on which I was one of the committee members. And she's had lots of accolades and awards. So I won't go through them all, but she also has an OAM. The weight of the OAMs and AMs on the stage last week was extraordinary, that the stage was going to collapse under the weight of all the gongs. It was quite extraordinary. So that's I think I'll introduce Julie, who's going to say a few words about why she thinks paper wings are still relevant. But my mad comrade, who I have a lot of time for and admire greatly, Julie Dempsey.
Thanks very much, Sandy. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. I would like to preface that even though I work in the lived experience branch at the Victorian Department of Health, which was uniquely set up and was not held as a child, I feel Sandy's reassuring presence with me as I read. Sandy herself describes having a faith in the reader as a companion on a journey. Sandy invites the reader to think and ponder with her about the inner musings of madness and the harshness and creativity that life can bring. These are universal themes such as family violence, neglect, alcohol abuse, sexual assault, religion and spirituality, patriarchy and feminism, war, the nature of reality and the human condition. For those of us who have ventured into the abyss of madness with all its cruelties potentially resulting in fractured lives, horrific sights, thoughts and beliefs, sadistic voices, invasive treatment, social stigma, human rights abuses, identity crisis and personal isolation, we can truly identify with Sandy's passage of trauma. Advocates and communicators like Sandy offer hope that their work will enable a more compassionate and understanding community of which we can stand as co-citizens, not alienated fringe dwellers. The stigma and exclusion from society experienced by people with mental health distress can only be overcome when the rest of the community recognises and acknowledges our common humanity. Whilst we are othered, perceived as a threat and cast into the shadows, we will remain separate, tortured souls. It is through efforts like Sandy's book, Flying with Paper Wings, that expose the reality of battling yourself and an ignorant world that the pain Sandy writes about can become shared. We can support each other and travel together instead of living alone in fear and misconstrued shame. As Sandy notes of her progress, healing is more than taking a pill or seeing a clinician. The whole of me needed to heal, and that came with the support of my team away from the psychiatric system. Meanwhile, Sandy's internal descriptions of her psychotic episodes allows the reader some comprehension of her mind and reality adrift. A window is generously and bravely open for us to peer into the inner convolutions of Sandy's thought processes and complex mind. As a fellow mad comrade, this can be strangely comforting to read. That someone has put into words the experience of psychosis with all its fast-moving richness and horror, simultaneous continuity and disruption, connecting the worldly and unworldly through yourself as a central wild vortex. Sandy asked me to talk tonight on why Flying with Paper Wings is still relevant today. The universal themes and questioning of our everyday existence and trusted reality, then relating this back to our basic humanity, for me makes this a timeless read. The personal context this is set against makes it a truly powerful and engaging piece of literature. We can all learn and build empathy from this book to better understand and support each other in a challenging world which may be more broken itself than those mad souls we see left to the streets. Indeed, Sandy poses a question in her writings: are these mad comrades a separate entity alien to the society we have created, or are they an intrinsic part and result of it? In the afterword in this new edition, Sandy also updates where she has travelled to today within the context of her achievements, the continuing haunting of her madness, reflecting on recovery that often a menacing shadow lurks behind you, her developing views on the medical model and treatment modalities, and questioning the changing mental health sector. All this is tempered with a mixture of reserved hope and black humour. This is no laid-back read. We are challenged to think hard about Sandy's reflections. However, at the same time cradled with a warm sense of the writer's authenticity, innocence and belief in our capacity for humanity. Sandy encourages hope with her ultimate positivity in the face of overwhelming distress. Quote, For all the pain my madness has caused me, it has shown me life in all its beauty and grotesqueness. I've been to the end of the universe and seen the sun in all its glory, unquote. This book does not languish in the so-called failure madness can be viewed as, but rather is a gritty show of determination, growth and potential despite all the harshness life in the world can throw at us. Good on you, Sandy.
Good
Thanks,
on you.
Jules.
Good on you too, Julie. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. We've got a little bit of time if anybody has any questions. If you have, then you can either write in the chat or you can put your hand up. I have actually added to the chat the link to Sandy's book on our website, as well as the link to her author page, so you can see all the other books that she's had published and that we at Spinifex have published. So does anybody want to raise your hand and ask a question? Sure, some very vocal people here, so I'd be surprised if nobody had anything to say. Extraordinary.
No.
Everybody is in stunned silence. I can't believe it.
Well, I'd just like to say congratulations. And I'm delighted to be here. It's a wonderful achievement, and I look forward to getting the book. And I've bought the first version, of course, so the second version sounds as if it's going to be even more exciting, really, because it takes us up to the present day. So it's fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, last call, eh?
Thanks, Jane.
Jackie. Jackie, did you want to say some other thing after that?
Oh, I was thinking, Sandy, that you've come so far and you've developed, your talents as a writer and a poet and all these other ways. And I was wondering if you were, madness has been your muse. Will it always be? Will you write about something else? I believe you've done a book on the wildlife of your area, haven't you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, during COVID, one of our TROPS Christmas Hills orchestral players, the clarinet player, he photographed all the birds of Eltham. That was his COVID project, and then we're talking on Zoom one night with the TROPS meeting, and Linda Shackleton said, "Why don't I write a haiku for each of the bird photos he's taken?" So for each of the birds, I've written a haiku, and it's extraordinary. It's gone through about 4 iterations of different sizes and different numbers of birds in it, but it's called The Birds of Eltham, and it's Tony's photographs and my haikus. It was during the time I was writing my pandemic haikus, and my life was just one big fat haiku. I couldn't see the world without counting syllables. And that's all I did. Will I write about madness? I mean, my Christmas Hills Rhapsody poem is a poem about Christmas Hills and celebrating where I live.
Yes.
Nothing to do with madness at all. So it's a nice, gentle, bucolic poem that I really, really like. But I'm sure back in my mind there's madness lurking that I want to write about, because I still want to mad poem that says it all about the completeness of madness, and I want to write a poem that actually captures the whole essence in those few stanzas of a poem. And I haven't done that yet, so I'm still seeking to do that.
Oh, that's good to hear. And if I can say, actually, the haiku of COVID was about a lot of other things, and very, very perceptive and funny, and a real commentary on the time. So in a way, I kind of forgot that is another of your books, even if it's not, even if it's not a book about something else. It was it's a lovely book to read. Thank you, Sandy.
Robin.
Oh, thanks, Jackie. No.
You've turned your...
Sorry, go on.
So, Robin, I'm thinking you might want to say something. Robin, you've just...
is that me? Yes.
Okay.
Margaret, yes. I am very... I want to make sure that this book is read by hundreds and thousands of people. I almost think it is or could be a textbook for people studying, well, psychiatry, social work, occupational therapy, so that they do get a very much better understanding of schizophrenia than I think that they get at the moment. And I think Sandy's book is a sort of a textbook. Is that a question for Spinifex or?
No, well, I
Yes. How do we get the right people? Or how do we get a lot of those people to read it? Yes.
I mean, getting it out there through publicity, and certainly the piece in last weekend's Australian was an important part in the start.
Yes,
of that. The other thing that is different this time is that we distribute our books internationally, and I hope that some of our international readers will come and watch this launch and also read Sandy's book, because the first edition was not available internationally. And I, there's quite a lot of hope in doing these things, but obviously we work very hard to try and make it happen. So I please recommend it to anybody you can think of. That applies to everybody who's here. And I hope that we do actually manage to do that, because I think it really deserves to be widely read by people who are professionals, but as well as that by families and by friends, because it makes a huge difference.
I think it should be read in combination with Out of the Madhouse, and I think that would be relevant internationally as well, even though it was about a Melbourne institution. It asks the broader questions about the move we've had worldwide from deinstitutionalisation. Indeed, it hasn't really worked because it hasn't been supported. And I think the questions that Margaret and Sandy pose in that give another perspective that I think should be taught across psychiatry and the mental health sector as well. And I think it's a great companion to Sandy's memoir. I think they're both an important read together.
And the poetry as well, for that matter. I mean, because it shows it's also about having an insight into what's going on. We are actually coming quite close to the end of the recording, but I'd like, and we can have a bit more of a discussion afterwards if there's still more discussion. But Renata, could you unmute and say some thank yous, please?
Yeah, so, okay. Thank you very much, Susan. And a big thank to Jackie and to Sandy, of course, and to Julie and to Margaret. It's really good to hear you talking about Sandy's book, this one and all her poetry, and of course the poetry of a plague. Is that what the haikus were called? That really needs to shift, because I think a lot of people don't want to know about the pandemic, but it's a fantastic book. It's actually a historical document of what happened during those years of lockup and the virus going around. And Sandy, I have to tell you, I think you are a writer with a capital W. If you want to be or not to be, you are. And Jackie will agree with that, and we all do. You're fantastic, and your poetry is also extremely moving and very wonderful. So we love you as a Spinifex also, we really do. But I'm not supposed to talk about that. I'm supposed to talk about that. The crew at Spinifex. Books don't just make themselves, and nothing at Spinifex would happen without Susan Hawthorne, who is kind of like, the dog's body, so to speak, and does everything that nobody else wants to do, especially metadata for all our international distribution, and is sometimes really very stressed about this. So thank you very much, Sue. Then Rachel McDermott, who is not here, but she's our very wonderful publicist who had a lot to do with that excerpt going into the Australian. And Pauline Hopkins, of course, who worked with you, Sandy, on the afterwards. She too, I think, is not here because she's working in a bookshop on Wednesday. Then there is Caitlin Roper, who is here, I think. At least Caitlin's phone is here. And Caitlin is our social media reporter, so to speak. She actually lives in Perth. We're all over Australia, which is really good. We did that actually before COVID. So thank you very much for, I should probably put lots of stuff already on X, as one has to say now, instead of Twitter. And then, of course, Daniel Osborne, who is the new, well, not so new anymore, manager, Spinifex manager, and who sends out the books to you and keeps us all, you know, orderly and fills all the orders, etc., etc. But I also want to mention Helen Christie. Now, you know, Helen is a typesetter, and it kind of sounds easy to put in afterwards on another already existing typesetting, but it wasn't. It was quite difficult. The fact that we do actually have a book now that looks very perfect is really due to Helen's incredible craft. So thank you, Helen. And the cover is very beautiful, and the paper wings, the red paper wings, are really gorgeous. And that is due to our designer, Deb Snipson, who does the most marvelous covers. And in fact, doing books is the most wonderful thing I think about doing books is actually looking at the cover, at a new cover. And Deb usually sends us about 15 copies of a cover, and then we can select which one we like best. And that's really wonderful, very creative. So it's a very dedicated crew. For all of us, we really want women writers, lesbian writers, absolutely radical feminist writers to write and blossom and have our words go across out into the world. And yes, we do distribute everywhere, and we are on the dreaded Amazon everywhere. Amazon Germany, Amazon UK, Amazon US, and of course Australia, for whatever it's worth. We all have our problems with Amazon, but it's good that the books are there, and Sandy's books are definitely there. So I think that's all really from me, and I'm sure we could continue to talk for a long time. But thank you very much all for coming, and I really hope that Paper Wings will fly, and thank you. And of course, Sandy, keep writing.
Thanks, Renata. Thank you so much for that.